Right. Thanks everybody for joining me. I'm not sure which number edition this is of Conversations with Dr. Tom Cowan and Friends. But I can tell you, I think this is probably the most exciting prospective interview that I've done because I have an amazing guest. Her name is Catherine Austin Fitz. And Catherine, you may not have seen my other interviews, but usually people say, this guy, he went to MIT and he's a medical doctor, and you were, I think, Assistant Secretary of Housing and Urban Development and all that. But I tend to not remember those things very well. So I like to say how I heard about you or how I met you and sort of what I'm interested in how I got interested in what you're doing, rather than a whole sort of biography, because I'll probably get that wrong. And then I always say, if you hear anything that you didn't think I got right or disagree with, I would love it if you correct me, because I'm doing my own riff. So we're basically talking today about mostly, I would say, the economic ramifications of where we are now, or how we got here economically. And I've been interested in this subject for a very long time, to the point where, believe it or not, my oldest child is, I think, 38 or 37 or something like that. And with all my children, I was enough into this then that I actually did not sign them up to get Social Security cards, because I didn't want them to be part of the sort of economic system. Eventually they all got them because they sort of had to. But I just say that to show that I was aware that there was something wrong here for 4 decades ago. And it went on, and eventually I learned what I would call the shocking news about how the dollar or currency is created. Because, one doesn't know anything about that. And then somehow, and again, correct me if I got this wrong, but somehow the currency is not created by the people or the people's, quote, representative, if you want to say that's what the government is. It's actually outsourced to private corporations, otherwise known as banks. And I think it was one of the heads of the Rothschild banking family who said, and I'll paraphrase because I don't think it's the exact quote, but give me control of the currency and I care not who makes the laws. And so after studying that for a number of years, in my heart book, which was written a number of years ago, I said, this is basically crazy. And I must say, I may be the only person who, in a book about the heart, talked about the way that we create currency, because it actually, I think, is a heart problem.
It absolutely is. If you look at the biggest killer in the world, it's heart disease. And the biggest driver to me of that is the drain that comes from the economic model. Yes. It's a drain on your heart.
Yes, drain on your heart. So I actually proposed in there that we should stop using this currency called the dollar and instead switch to something called Cowans, which then I would be in control of. However, that didn't go very far, and so nobody took that up, and I guess I don't really blame them. But I only say that to say that it's been, literally decades since I have thought that the model of, because if you're going to buy a house and somebody else can make money and you have to work for money, they always win because they just make more money and then they get the house and you don't. And I never could quite understand why the rest of the world would go along with that, except for the fact that basically I think we would shoot them if they didn't. There may be other reasons, but and so that led me into thinking, are all these countries sort of in cahoots, and this is just one kind of crime syndicate that's running the whole thing? And I think that sort of leads us into where we are today. And I'm wondering if, with that background, you could lead us into, for people who may not know, where does this currency come from? What's the significance of currency, right? I mean, what is that? Why do we even, I don't know if it's why we use currency, but how did it come about, and why is, you speak a lot about controlling the currency, and this is a currency problem. And I don't think there's probably anybody in the world who knows more about this situation than you do. So if with that background, if I could hear anything you would like to say to fill us in. That would be
Okay.
great.
Okay. We are at the cusp of an effort by whoever leads the planet to cancel currency. So we are now facing the end of currency. So if we talk about currency, just remember, I think it's something that's about to come to an end, or the leadership wants it to come to an end. I would say the defining characteristic of life on planet Earth is we live within a governance system, which is a mystery. I've lived my whole life and I've tried to figure out who really runs things and how they run things. And I have to tell you, I don't know.
Wow.
I have lots of, high octane speculation, which is very informed high octane speculation. But I want you to think about how ridiculous and absurd it is that we live on a planet where the leadership is a mystery and the majority of the financial transactions and financial management is a secret.
Well, so just let me stop you there, because this is not like me saying the government is a mystery or the leadership, because I've actually never worked in government except maybe the Peace Corps, which I guess you could say. This is not my 10 friends. This is somebody, correct me if I'm wrong, you were Assistant Secretary for Housing and Urban Development.
Right. So I've worked at the top of Washington and at the top of Wall Street.
Right.
And I have an online book called Dylan Reed and the Aristocracy of Stock Profits. And it tells the story. I've tried to publish it in hard copy, but each time I'm threatened. And the last time they threatened my family. So I just leave it online. I figured it's not censored. And I tell the story in it once where another partner at my firm was talking about the new president that we'd acquired. It's long ago in the 80s. And I said, it's strange. He doesn't strike me as the kind of guy our chairman would pick. And the other partner, whose father had been the chairman, said, oh, well, Nick didn't pick him. The Rothschilds picked him. I said, what do they have to do with us? We own the firm. And he looked at me like I was the stupid, this is why you can't make a woman a partner. And he just rolled his eyes and walked off.
Right.
I said, oh, great. The conspiracy theories are true. Anyway, but the planet, so we operate in a governance system, which is a mystery, and the financial system is just a component of the governance system. In other words, when people come to me and say, how should we reform the financial system? I don't know, because it's only part of the governance system. You can't, it's a little bit like saying you can heal a leg without worrying what's going on in the body. It's very similar. So we're defined by mystery. And in fact, over the last 50 years, more and more and more of the governmental finances and budgets have become more and more secret. And the technology that's being developed, which is oftentimes invisible, has become more and more secret. So secrecy has been rising since World War II, not diminishing. And in fact, in the last 3 years, it's taken major steps up. As a result, you have a general population whose understanding of what's going on in the technology that is in use is totally, they can't even fathom what's going on financially and the technology that's in use. I just read a wonderful newsletter by Sophia Smallstorm, and she described how the Comanches were wiped out by the European settlers. And she said the problem wasn't that they couldn't defeat the technology that they were facing. She said the problem was they couldn't even fathom that technology existed. Right. So they couldn't develop, successful strategies to deal with it because they couldn't even face it existed. And that's the separation we have between the top and the bottom has gotten that great.
Would you also say that it's not just the technology that we can't fathom, we also can't fathom the mindset? that they're using?
Well, we can't fathom how the financial system works, because basically you've got people who can print money out of thin air, and then other people who pay 16% to borrow it, which
So
is
who are the people
enormous.
who can print money out of thin air?
So who are they?
Yeah,
Okay, so I'm just going to, essentially it's the people who control the central banking system.
right.
And if you look at the governance committee above them, what I describe that as is Mr. Global. And we could have a whole conversation
Yeah.
about all the different industries and layers and my conjecture about who it really is. But the reality is we're not sure who Mr. Global is, and we're not sure what the risks they're managing are, particularly geophysical risks.
Yeah.
And that's one of the big questions. Now, I used to work and interact with a lot of people who clearly interacted directly with Mr. Global. So, there's little snippets we can learn. But essentially, if you look at the technology we're dealing with, on the financial side, we're dealing with people who can print money out of thin air, for free. So money's free. They have a 0% cost of capital. And we have a cost of capital. The average American pays 16 to 17% on their credit card. And that's a huge difference.
So in other words, just so we all understand that, in other words, if you're one of those people, I think you mean the central bankers or their affiliates,
Right.
they can literally make as many dollars as they want to do whatever they want with no laws or constraints.
So let me give you an example.
Yeah.
Let's just pretend we're in a world where we have two groups of people. One are online retailers and one are Main Street retailers. Okay.
Yeah.
So the online retailers and their pals pretend that there's a plague, and they announce that all the Main Street retailers are non-essential.
Yeah.
Okay. At which point the central bank prints a lot of money, which they lend to the online retailers at 0%. And those retailers can now take over the market share of the Main Street retailers essentially for free.
Yeah.
They can take all their income, and that drives their stocks up. Okay. So their stocks go very high, and let's say they sell their stocks when they're very high, and they reinvest that money in building out online or smart grids in communities so that they can expand their market share further. And let's say the government creates something called opportunity zones where they can shelter their capital gains tax on their sale of stocks. So how do they get a whole lot of real estate fast and cheap? Well, they send in an army of protesters to burn the place down in the opportunity zones, and that enables them to pick up the real estate for cheap. Now, if you follow all of this financial engineering and sort of machinations, what you realize is they're getting a whole lot of valuable assets for 10 cents on the dollar price with money that got printed out of thin air.
Got it.
Okay.
And did they ever have to pay this money back or no?
It depends on where you are in the food chain, yes or no. But you know something? When I'm guaranteed a 20% return and I have to pay back money that I'm borrowing at 1%,
doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. Remember, the most valuable asset here is not the money. It's not the money. The head of the MIT Media Lab once said something long ago, and it's stuck with me since. He says, in a digital age, data about money is worth more than money. In other words, intelligence. If I have the intelligence to know where and when to buy and sell, I don't need money.
Yeah.
So the powerful part of this network is the ability to not only know what's going to happen before it's happening, but to engineer what happens.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So let's go back. For hundreds and hundreds of years, the Western world has been on a model called the central banking warfare model. The central banks print money out of thin air, and the military makes sure they take it. So why did the dollar go and Cowan's not go? Because you didn't have a nuclear arsenal and you couldn't force, you didn't have the CIA and the Department of Defense. You couldn't force people to accept Cowans in exchange for valuable natural resources. Because think of the central banking warfare. We're printing money out of thin air, and people all around the globe are trading hard labor and hard assets for paper printed out of thin air.
So why does Russia, China, Venezuela, Bolivia, France, why do they use this money?
Okay, so wait, so you're getting ahead. Look, bear with me. Let me keep going this way, because that's a very good question. So for many, many centuries, we've used the central banking warfare model. But if we're going to globalize, the central banking warfare model stops working. Okay, because if the first world is exploiting the third world, the central banking warfare model works. The question, if you globalize, who's going to be the person you drain or harvest? Now, to a certain extent, what we've been watching in the first world is our local communities drained and harvest more and more. Okay, but at some point the model breaks down. And in 1991, when I left the Bush administration, I believed we were going to have to change the model. And I started a company to prototype new solutions. And part of it was technology gives you the ability to do things you couldn't do before. Now you can increase learning metabolisms within communities and on networks in ways that create amazing wealth potential and ways of changing this model.
What do you mean by learning metabolisms?
So a group of say 10,000 people in a village or town can so enhance and improve their learning metabolism to dramatically increase their productivity. They can do a lot more for themselves. Information technology should be decentralizing and can make the little guys way more productive up against the big guys. And it's only been through central bank intervention and government intervention that it's made the large guys more powerful.
Can you give me an example of what the little guy could do to, what's the word you use, to his learning metabolism to improve his output or product?
So here's what I was working on in my company in the 90s at Hamilton Securities Group. If you can create a local currency, so there's no reason a neighborhood can't have a central bank and circulate currency locally. In fact, it can be very, very productive. And the only reason it doesn't happen, I would say, is because there's always central bank intervention to protect its monopoly. But with a local digital system, particularly one that had local encryption, and you could then start to circulate equity locally. Now, pretend for a second that you have 100 small businesses in your community and 50 of them are in the local equity pool managed jointly by the business group for that place. And the pool itself, like a venture pool, could issue stock to all the people in that community. Okay. Yep. So you do an IPO and all the members of the community who want to own non-voting shares in a pool that reflects their local businesses. Okay, now I can make money from my local businesses succeeding. And what we find is if you own stock in a company, you're much more likely not only to use their products, but give them feedback and give them intelligence, which helps them succeed. But not only that, if you're in a pool, the local businesses, instead of just competing with each other, they can now, in other words, if the business next door is successful, it lowers my cost of capital and raises my stock. So I have a vested interest in getting together with the local businesses who are in the pool and pooling accounting and back office services. One of the things you find out if you work in Washington is the big businesses hire all the smart tax attorneys and lawyers and come in and lobby. If the small businesses could form these kinds of aggregations around equity, they could too. Now, here's where so now we've posited a couple ways where
can I stop you for a minute here, and because I want to see if I understood you correctly here. So in other words, you live in a place like Podunk, Iowa. And there's a hardware store, there's a flower store, there's 10 small farmers, there's a grocery store, there's a burger store, there's lots of stores. There's lots of independently owned businesses.
Right.
They form together, actually create their own currency, like a podunk. And then everybody who wants to voluntarily, who lives in Podunk, buys shares in the company. They end
So
up,
the currency is separate from the equity pool.
yeah.
So
Okay.
they also put together an equity pool and sell shares. Now, let me tell you why this is important. Most customers who walk into the local hardware store have a pension fund and a 401k and an IRA, which is financing a big box store to come in and take away
Right.
their market. Okay. So my customers are financing the guys are going to come in and shut me down instead of financing me. But
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be that way.
So we could all use our, so two sort, one, we could be owners of our local businesses.
Investors.
And therefore we would love if they did well, and we would
Right.
say, you guys got to get organic broccoli instead of somewhere else. And by the way, Joe down the road, he grows it. And
Right.
Then we could make a currency and keep the money so it's not being siphoned off by
Right.
people who are making it. And then we
Or
have
debased. It's not being debased. It's not going down in
Right.
value. It's reflecting the value of our time. Okay, but more importantly, if we created a publicly traded or a liquid stock, we could take our pension funds and retirement savings and invest it locally instead of shipping it to the competitors who are going to try and
Right.
destroy our little businesses.
Got it.
Okay. So if you look at the number one reason for the destruction of family wealth in the last 50 years in America, it's exactly this game, is centralizing control of capital in a way that centralizes control of equity, and now is being used, along with some pretty vicious healthcare crisis games to basically control market share.
Got it.
But let me show you the magic in this, because we're only playing with the financial engineering now. If you look at, imagine we had a publicly traded equity pool for your community. Okay, so I live in Tennessee. So if we had a equity pool for Hardeman County, Tennessee, what are the ways that I could make the stock go up? So let's say everybody has an investment through the pool in the little businesses, and the banks are supportive and helpful, and we're all excited because we own shares. What could we do to make the value of our shares go up?
You could help them get better products and have more customers and have better quality and better marketing, and maybe make a deal with the people in Kentucky to buy their stuff, and you make
Right.
refrigerators and we'll make flowers.
So one is to help the businesses get smarter, and new technology can do that. Okay,
Yeah.
so we can get smarter. Another, though, is to improve the environment in our place. One of the things you see is the healthier the environment is, the more the asset value in that place, and the more people are attracted to that place. So for example, landscaping, ending pollution, changing the energy so that it's less harmful to the environment. Anything that will improve the environment will improve the value of the stock, as will anything that improves education. So the number one, you can see, for example, in the District of Columbia, you could see in the suburban line, two houses across the street from each other, and one is worth 20% more because it's in a better school district.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. One of my backcastings for doing these kinds of community equity pools had two counties fighting over the teachers by giving them stock options to get the best teachers away.
Yeah.
But literally investing in the environment and education you create a joint incentive system to make the place more wonderful in a whole variety of ways. Okay.
Right.
And you have the businesses engaged in really being part of doing that, because again, everything that lowers the cost of their capital makes them more productive. And that includes bringing in new technology.
Yeah.
So if you look at some of the things which I believe are possible with new energy technology, the value of the land and real estate will explode from lowering the energy costs.
And what sort of energy technology are you referring to?
If you look at cold fusion or some of the breakthrough energy technologies, I'm not thinking so much of renewable, although there are great renewable stories. There's one town in Germany that brought in a form of renewable energy and now pays more than 100% of their own energy costs. They export energy.
Right.
So, you know,
So I
they're
think what you're talking about is if you take a small town and just sort of across the board make their life better, you know, no glyphosate, organic farms, clean food, clean water, schools where children actually learn something that's true, and parents who have good work and you know, meaningful stuff, that increases the value of everybody's life in that community and their assets.
right. So, you know, the way you build a great civilization is one child at a time. It's that simple. But let me step back. What we've been dealing with globally and in America for the last 50 years is more and more use of digital technology and information technology to centralize control.
Yeah.
Centralized control politically, centralized control economically. And essentially, if you look at where it's going, it's a highly psychopathic model. And what I think you and I are very interested in is, okay, how can we decentralize? Because this kind of technology should be decentralizing.
So why is it a psychopathic model? Can you flesh that out a little bit? I mean, I think I know my answer, but I'd love to hear your answer.
It's complex. It's not simple.
Yeah.
One is when you are, so my committee for the nickname, my nickname for the committee that runs the world is Mr. Global.
Yeah.
When you're in Mr. Global shoes, you find managing people very, very frustrating. And, you know, there's a theory in America that the swamp is only at the top, and that's not the case. The swamp is bottom up, and the corruption is also bottom up. And when the more secret you make the economy, the more frustrating you find managing it. So, for example, one of the things I've tracked for a long time is what I call the financial coup d'etat. We knew coming into the 90s that we had to change the model. And the question was how?
Yeah.
And of course, one option is to dramatically centralize control and lower the population so that it's manageable, and then manage everything with AI software and robots. You know, that is, if you're Mr. Global, that is the more risk adverse option.
Yeah.
In other words, if you're being conservative, it's like, I give up trying to talk with these people. Anyway, we knew we had to do it. And there was a real push, which had been going on for many years, to dramatically, to get the budget on a financially sound basis. And they came into 1995. And I have to tell you, the leadership who wanted the non-psychopathic solution were in a state of complete frustration. They couldn't get the crowd to support, in a democracy, they couldn't get general support for a financially responsible solution. Now, we've seen other countries where they did. You know, right now I'm in the Netherlands. The Netherlands was remarkable in its ability to sort of institute and maintain financial responsibility. But in America, they couldn't. And when the 1995 deal busted, you literally had the leadership, from what I can tell, and I can tell you the different stories that led me to this conclusion. The leadership said, that's it. We give up. We cannot get the American population to support a financially responsible solution. So what we're going to do is we're just going to move all the money out of the country. And then when it, you know, when we've got all the assets and we've moved them out, we'll just pull the plug. And COVID-19 is step one in the pull the plug.
So so when you say they couldn't get a financially sound economy, they couldn't get a financially sound solution, that means what? Like a balanced budget?
Right. So what they did was they bubbled the economy and then shifted There's $21 trillion that's gone missing from the US government since that time. It was very interesting. In 1997, I had a, wait a minute, sorry, Zoom went. I had a board for one of my subsidiaries, which was the leadership of the pension fund industry, sort of 10 top guys in the pension fund industry. And I met with them to show them my plan for re-engineering county by county with equity and local currency, sort of bottom up. And the head of the largest pension fund in the country, Bill Christ, who was president of CalPERS, looked at me and he said, "You don't understand, it's too late. They've given up on the country. They're moving all the money out starting in the fall. You've got to get to Nick Brady," who had been Secretary of the Treasury and my boss at Dillon Reed. And he said, they've given up. They're moving all the money out. And I thought when he said that, I thought he meant we're shifting the allocations in the pension funds to invest in Asia. Because in fact, when they started moving all the money out of the federal government, we did put big investments and there was big shift in money to Asia. But lo and behold, he said that to me in April 1997. That October, which was the beginning of the 1998 fiscal year, is when the 21 trillion started to go missing. Now,
so what were they doing with that money? They were buying stuff in Asia?
So let me give you a couple of the different options and theories. One is you shift significant money into Asia and the emerging markets, but the big bet was Asia. And so if you look at Asia, we have a great wrap up on the rise of the Asian consumer, but Asia is basically headed at its current growth rate to merge with the developed and the G7 world in terms of per capita income. So, which is a very dramatic sort of political and economic shift that we're going through.
Yeah.
So one was that I believe a significant amount of money went into what is called the secret space program, and a significant amount of money went into invisible technology of various kinds, including weather control and technology which can mimic disasters. So most people assume a tsunami is natural based on the trading patterns. I don't assume that at all.
Yeah, got it.
Right. So, and I think one of the most important investments they made was in mind control technology. So if you look at the secret societies, so when I was growing up, I grew up in Philadelphia, and Philadelphia was basically run by a combination of the secret societies. And if you look at what their sort of, where did their power come from? One of their powers came from literally centuries of using mind control technology. But what happened in World War II, you had the Nazis do tremendous experimentation in mind control technology through Operation Paperclip. They brought their technology to the United States. You had the black budget then kick in, and this is where the big secret money makes such a difference. Working with the intelligence agencies basically took that over, and from everything I can tell, developed that technology to the point where you could deliver it on TV, smartphone, internet. My first really sort of public encounter with it was in, of all years, 1984. I overheard, this is when I was on Wall Street, I overheard several people, basically billionaire types, talking about entrainment technology and subliminal programming that was going to be rolled out on TV. And I have to tell you, Tom, it scared me to death. I went home, that was it for me and TVs. TVs were out the door.
Yeah.
And my husband insisted on keeping the TV. And so, and that was really one of the drivers. We got divorced 2 years later, and I haven't had a TV since. I had a decorator bought a TV for me when I worked in the administration. She said, "You can't work in the Bush administration and not have a TV," but out it went.
Got it.
And when my smartphone, when I'm in Tennessee, it sits in the car. It's not allowed in the house. So that technology, I think, is one of the most, one of the things that has given the pro-centralization team the most confidence in doing many of the things we see unfolding.
Got it. So let me see if I got this. So mid-90s, there was a group of people that it sounds like you were part of who were saying we can actually make a different economy happen, this sort of local.
So I wasn't part of them. I'd been asked to join the Federal Reserve as a governor,
Yeah,
and I said no and started my own company because I said, I believe that if I could find a plan whereby decentralization could be more wealth producing than centralization, and a democratic society could work for the top guys, that they would listen. Now, I was mistaken, but I really had
Yeah.
faith that they would listen. And by 1995, they didn't want to listen. They were just ready to steal the money and go.
yeah,
And and my concern was the number one issue for the pension funds at that time was, how are we going to provide for the boomers' retirement? And it was clear to me when the 21 trillion started to go missing that their decision was, we're not. We're just going to stuff their pension funds full of phony baloney paper, pull all the real money, get control of all the real assets, and then leave them high and dry.
wow,
Because we'd rather pay for space than nursing homes.
got it. So they basically made a decision around then that we're done with this place. We're going to pull the money out and have a more intensified, using all these sort of nefarious techniques that they already had developed to centralize and centralize.
So, well, we got to talk about the red button problem next. So I would say they were left with a mathematical reality that if I cannot get the financial side, if I cannot get a democratic society to go along with a financially sound equation, the only other thing I can do is lower the life expectancy.
So
It's an actuarial, right? So if we can't do the financially responsible side of the equation, then my only choice is to leave you high and dry or lower life expectancy. I would note the month after they failed to get the budget deal was when the opioids were approved to go forward. That's when Purdue got its approval to go forward with OxyContin by the FDA.
Wow.
You know, and it was the same with all the predatory lending. So the predatory lending and all these different things were all designed to significantly lower life expectancy across the board.
Got it.
Okay, so let's talk about the red button problem, because it's very easy to blame this, on the upper echelons. So I want to talk about the broader problem.
Yeah.
In the central banking warfare model, the CIA and the military has been running around the world, knocking heads and getting cheap natural resources for many, many decades. And most Americans have been subsidized by that system.
Yeah.
And very few objected.
In other words, you use our money, we take your resources, and if you don't like it, that's not going to go well for you.
Well, let me tell two stories. So at the end of World War II, George Kennan said, okay, we're 6% of the people, we have 50% of the resources. The only way we can keep this going is to knock some heads. So Goldwater gets up there and says, okay, we're going to have to drop bombs if we want to keep this going. And the American people rejected that. They said, oh no, we're good Christians. We don't want to drop bombs on other people. So Jimmy Carter came along and he said, okay, we're going to shiver in front of the fireplace. We're going to cut back. And the American people said, oh no, we don't want to do that. And then the Bushes came along and said, you know something? Y'all are good Christians. Here's your check. Don't ask questions. And we said, okay. I mean, that's part of where the secrecy comes in. So I'm going to tell you my red button story.
Okay.
So in the summer of 2000, I was asked by a natural care practitioner to give a presentation on how the money works in organized crime. And it later became a very funny article, a famous article called Narco Dollars for Beginners. And the idea was to help you understand the intersection of organized crime profits with Wall Street and Washington. So the speech was given at a conference called Spiritual Frontiers Foundation International. And they are a wonderful group of people, highly educated, and they the goal is to help our society evolve spiritually. So they're very compassionate, caring people. So I'm in the middle of the presentation and I'm talking about congressional testimony that occurred in 1998 regarding the intelligence agencies bringing in drugs to South Central LA, the so-called Dark Alliance allegations Gary Webb wrote about. So at the time, a reporter from the Department of Justice had told her, the head of public relations, or somebody in the public relations department at the Department of Justice had told a reporter I was working with that the US economy launders $500 billion to $1 trillion a year. That was in 1998. It's much bigger with financial fraud. But the US economy is the global leader in laundering illegal monies, not just drugs, but everything, illegal gambling, sex trafficking, everything. So I said to this wonderful audience of spiritually evolved people, what would happen if we stopped being the global leader in laundering $500 billion to $1 trillion a year? And we had a little conversation and they said, well, our taxes would go up because we'd have trouble financing the deficit. And our government checks might stop and our IRAs would go down because that money would go to Zurich and London and Hong Kong instead of coming to the New York Stock Exchange. And I said, okay, well, let's pretend there's a big red button up here on the lectern. And if you push that button, you can stop all hard narcotics trafficking in your city, your county, your state tomorrow, thus offending the people who control, 100 years of accumulated profits thereon. Who will push the button? And out of 100 people dedicated to evolving our society spiritually, guess how many would push the button? One. So I said to the other 99, why would you not push the button? And they said, we don't want our taxes to go up. We don't want our government checks to stop. And we don't want our IRAs to go down in value. So the dependency on warfare and organized crime is very, very old and very, very deep. And the thing I discovered that day, the problem was not that they wouldn't push the red button. The problem was they were not willing to go into the invention room and have an honest conversation about what's going on and how do we turn the red button green. Because if we can make money pushing the red button, then we can push the red button. But the thing that stops us is total secrecy. Now, as this has happened and the crowd has supported, generally in politics, the guy who hands out the most money wins, right?
Yeah.
So the more organized crime, the more corrupt government, the more warfare you do, the more money there is to hand out. And that's what the crowd supports. So I go back to the Bushes who said, here's your check. You're good Christians. Don't ask questions. And in politics in America, the winners politically have been the people who come up with a story of here's your check and here's your story of why you're good. So now we've fallen into the trap of saying they are bad.
They being the big boys.
Right.
Yeah.
So the only difference is certainly since World War II, the big boys have cut us in for a slice of the profits.
Yeah.
Now what's changing is they don't need us anymore. So now they're cutting us out.
And why don't they need us anymore?
They don't need us anymore because if you, and I shouldn't say they don't need us, they don't need as many of us.
Yeah.
And they certainly don't need, if you go through the population, it's very selective. But if you look at what they can do with AI automation and robotics.
Yeah.
And then if you look at how much is owed to certain people because of pension fund or insurance or other liabilities. So for example, in New York State, according to the statistics I was able to find online, the long-term care insurance industry had just experienced the year before, I think in 2018, a 35% increase in payouts. If that kept continuing, I'm assuming they would go bankrupt.
Right.
And so what happened in New York, if anything, was an insurance industry bailout.
So essentially by creating health problems for these older people or other ways of isolating them and torturing them, then they stick around less and then you don't have to pay for it.
Right. So either you're significantly lowering life expectancies or you're sending to a message to families, your parents are safe or kept at home.
Yeah. Got it.
So you're killing demand for, I think it's more complicated than that. I'm grossly oversimplifying, but the reality is if you go through the population, many, many people are worth more dead than alive. So especially now since you've stuffed their pension funds full of government paper that's being debased rapidly as we speak.
Got it. Okay, so when you when you get into this whole currency that which I think we're talking about the dollar, and then you say that the currency is ending and there's going to be a new model. Can you flesh that part out for us?
Sure. So since the financial crisis,
We're talking 2008.
let's go back to 2000. Since 2000, several times we have run up the dollar float around the world and then pulled credit and entrapped people. It's called a debt entrapment. And societies around the world have been very frustrated by those successive debt entrapments, and it makes them want to be independent of the dollar system and be able to provide their own credit, just as I described a community being able to.
Can you describe a debt entrapment for everybody? What does that look like?
So I just described it. I'm on Main Street. I finance my business with a 16% credit card. You come in, declare me non-essential. The central bank, directly or indirectly gives you 0% cost of capital to come and take away all my customers and market share, but I still have to pay Chase Manhattan Bank my 16%, right?
Got it. So you got no way to pay it.
You got no way to pay it except the government is offering you subsidy and you've got to go along with their terms and conditions. I just got a great email from our producer. We have a producer in France, and she said, "You're not going to believe this. For all the businesses here to get their government subsidy, they had to put all their financial documents and private financials in a cloud that's on the Amazon cloud." I said, "Oh, well, the private equity guys are going to have that. That."
Yeah.
So, a lot of this comes down again to this information and intelligence warfare.
Right. It reminds me when I was practicing medicine not so long ago, and I was a Medicare provider a number of years ago. In order to keep being a Medicare provider, I had to do electronic records. And I didn't realize it, but when I signed up to do electronic records, they were essentially getting access to my charts.
Right.
And so before electronic records, if somebody came in with high cholesterol, I would say something like Mazel Tov.
Right.
And now they would actually, and it was hard for them to know that because they would have to send somebody to my office and look through these 3,000 paper charts. And I would say, I don't know which ones have high cholesterol. You have to look. And they just wouldn't do that. But now they could just click, Cowan, high cholesterol, send me notices saying, if you want to keep being paid, you have to put these people on statin drugs.
Right.
And they didn't say it quite as boldly as that, but that was really the point, that everything was known. And that's a if I was dependent on that for my livelihood, that's a problem. Right.
They have many, many different ways in terms of interceding between the professional and their professional obligations to their client or patient.
Yeah, right.
So let me tell you two stories that will sort of indicate how to get or sort of where the solutions lie. When I first moved to Tennessee, I was sitting in Bible class one day, and I always get people to talk about their money. And what I discovered was I was looking at three friends, one who was borrowing money from a New York City bank and paying 25% on their credit card to finance their business, one whose IRA was invested in the same bank, and they were probably getting at that point 3 to 4%, although the financial crisis was coming, it would have been way down. And another who had a CD in a local bank whose correspondent was that same New York bank. So this one is investing for 4% in this New York bank. This one is lending to this New York bank for maybe 4% when it's all said and done. And then their friend is borrowing it back for 25%.
Got it.
Now, why do those three friends need that New York bank in between them?
Yes. Why?
I've never been able to figure it out. Where I come from, that's a 2,000 basis point arbitrage plus.
Yeah.
We would never let that sit there and not take advantage. But
but that is exactly, I think, the key to this solution here and to understanding. Why doesn't Joe lend directly to Fred? And I think it's got something to do with trust, and it has something to do with the power of anonymity with it when regard to money.
right, but when you can use a good local bank, because whether you circulate equity or debt within a community, I would always find ways of protecting that anonymity and keeping it there. It's very productive for many reasons, but you can do that with a good local bank.
Yeah. So let me see if you agree with this. I think the reason Joe doesn't lend to Fred is as Joe values his friendship so much to Fred that he knows that if Fred somehow doesn't pay him back because he goes out of business or something, that he would have to end the friendship with Fred, and he would rather Fred have financial problems than lose the friendship.
That's one reason, but there are many others because Fred's not always trustworthy.
Right.
So it's very interesting. I had, so let me tell you several stories in this vein. My uncle had a wonderful friend who at one point I talked to, I don't know, we were standing around at one of the, at a Quaker meeting, in fact it was. And I said, he was complaining about his discomfort with the equity markets. So what came out, I talked to him, he had 5 kids and they all had mortgages with high interest rates. I said, this is a no-brainer. Why don't you finance all your kids? When you die, they're going to get the money anyway, right? So why don't you just keep it in the family and let them pay their high interest rate to you? And then you don't have to worry about the stock market. So I saw him when my uncle many years later died, and I saw him at the funeral, and he said, I did. I refinanced all 5 kids. And he said, I get a really sweet yield. And something else? I missed the big boom in the stock market, but I sleep like a baby every night.
Yeah.
So, but I want to tell you one last story about the smartest investment I ever made. When in 1996, I basically got attacked by the Department of Justice in a very ugly enemy of the state process where they're making stuff up. It's one of these long shaggy dog stories. And this went on for a couple of years. And then in 1998, they just really renewed their attacks. It got very, very dirty. And in the process, they tried to shut off all my credit and income from any source whatsoever. And at that point, one of the things I sat down and I realized that I had given or lent to friends and family $250,000. I had $250,000 out there on the network.
Yeah.
I had no documents. I had no paper. It was just it was a character loan or a character gift.
Right.
And everybody got together, including this wonderful uncle, and said, well, she always helped everybody. Let's help her. And if I hadn't have done that, they wouldn't have helped.
Yes.
And it went on for 11 years. And at the end of 11 years, I sat down and I counted up all the people who'd paid me back the loans or who'd gifted me money. And it wasn't necessarily the same people who gifted it back. And I had been repaid or gifted exactly $250,000.
Wow.
It was like a miracle.
Yeah.
And when I settled the litigation, I got all the money in, and then I bonused out almost all the money because I was sure they're going to try and come after me on the taxes. I said, no problem. I just bonus this out and I'm going to put it back in that community bank because that community bank saved my life.
Yeah.
And one of the things I know is, I trust that community bank a lot more than I trust the financial system.
So basically what you're saying is human to human connections are what are the things that have the most value.
And this is a very big if, my favorite story about what's going to happen in the future is the story of Gideon in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
And the moral of the story in Gideon is you can only play this game with people who are ethical and competent. No bad dogs, because you cannot afford to do business or function with people who don't have integrity. And if you look at the big critical issues on governance of a community equity pool, it's putting together the people you need to ensure that you have the expertise, the competence, and the strategic and moral leadership you need to do it very well and prudently.
So how do you do that?
It's very hard. I mean, I can sit down, we can have a whole show on how you do that. And I'm happy to do that. But it's not easy because we have seen tremendous corruption of the general population.
Yeah.
Most of the people that I sit down and talk to have been trained and learned terrible financial habits, terrible sort of integrity. They have been taught to be corrupt.
Yeah.
And in fact, I do want them to borrow from the big bank because the big bank has the clout to, do all the evil things to them, and they'll respect the big bank. They won't respect, an honest local lender.
Yeah.
So you have to be exceptionally careful. And, my guess is groups that do this are going to have to really work at educating themselves as to what is good practices.
Yeah. And probably put in systems. So this sounds to me
Right.
like a bit of it's not just relying on the goodwill. It's actually putting in systems that
Right.
actually help people to become sound thinkers
Right.
and moral and all the rest of it.
So I'll give you two examples. One of the things you'll find is you have to understand, I love my bank. I have the world's greatest community bank as my banker, and I love my bank. And my bank is run by my cousins who are part of what one friend of mine calls the Southeastern Quaker conspiracy.
Yeah.
And a bank like my cousin's bank is a bank which really understands how to do that. And they understand who is reliable and who is not. They have remarkable intelligence on the markets they serve. And that's why one of the things you want to do if you do something locally is you want to find one or more of those great local banks or credit unions and get them involved, because they still maintain a lot of that technology. They still have that in-house, and they are exceptionally valuable in thinking about how you do that. And I would, especially for loan servicing or investment servicing, they have the systems and capacity to do that, whereas we don't.
I got it. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Maybe let's switch tracks a little bit and give us a little bit of your take then. I think you have so far on sort of what this whole COVID thing is about and where you see it going, maybe in particularly after the election. If you can.
So I thought what's happening with COVID, I thought was going to happen after the election. And one of the questions was, why did it accelerate and happen before? And because I've been very close to John Rappaport for many years, I've lived through many phony,
Yeah.
Almost pandemics or almost epidemics or little mini epidemics. So I've lived through this a lot. If you watch the financial patterns, to me, COVID-19 was designed to do a couple of things. One is to keep the dollar system going. It's been very positive for the dollar. The second was, and as they kept the dollar going, to move more market share under central control. So the global billionaires are up 27% since March. It's been very successful.
And the reason the dollar system needed to be kept going is that because so many other countries were saying we don't want any part of this anymore?
So many other countries were looking for workarounds. So I would recommend the most recent wrap up we published in hard copy is State of Our Currencies.
Yeah.
So I keep trying to get a copy to you. I know I've gotten a copy to your son, but it describes what has happened since the financial crisis. for other countries to look for ways of improving their market share, or the Chinese to improve their market share vis-a-vis the US currency. Now, the US currency is still very, very strong, but it's what the economists once called dangerous and dominant. And what's happening is the US is using the dollar system to assert sort of empire control, and all sorts of different countries around the world who just want a currency to trade
Yeah.
are tired of being controlled through the currency, and they're frustrated. So there's a lot of frustration building up. At the same time, there is pressure from a variety of forces to institute a digital system which will end currencies as we know it. So at the retail level, if you look at the currency they would like to implement, it is one which is essentially accredited at the company store. The central bank can stop you from trading. In other words, you can be turned on and off from central headquarters. And so it's not really your money. It's your money so long as you do what you're told and behave. So if the central bankers decide you can't travel more than 5 miles from your home, and if you travel past 5 miles, then your card won't work.
Right.
So it's a
So you
complete,
couldn't go to the co-op 6 miles away because the only money they take is this credit system. That's the only
Right.
money that's allowed. And they know that you're 6 miles from your home and it doesn't work there.
right. It's like the old plantation system.
Yeah, right.
You have to buy at the company store. Now, when they built the railroads that, the train could not go from the East Coast to the West Coast unless you laid the tracks the whole way, right?
Yeah.
Okay. The gruesome thing to understand about what the central banks want is they want the train tracks. The last mile is into your neighborhood and your home in very invasive ways, but the last inch is into your body.
Got it.
So whether it's digital identity, and if you look there, if you come into our website, if you're logged in, you see a database called Dr. Gates's Creepy Technology, because they're prototyping thousands of systems and they're patenting thousands of technologies. I don't think they know which one they want. There's a huge competition, and they're in prototype phase. But if you look at COVID-19, it was designed to keep the dollar system going, but accelerate the new. And the tricky thing about the new one is, how are you going to get the chip system and the mind control system to work to a level of complete total control?
Yeah.
And that's where the health aspect comes in, because you want to basically, just like, Bill Gates, the rumors are that Bill Gates' claim to fame was putting a Trojan horse, a backdoor in your computer. They put in the operating system and you have to update it every quarter because of a virus, right?
Yeah.
So now we're talking about putting an operating system in the human body. Even Moderna called it the software of life.
Yeah.
Okay. And you've got to update it every quarter because there's a virus, right? Right. This is why you coming along and saying there are no viruses, that doesn't fit with the script. Because
Right.
how are we going to get you to install an operating system and update it?
Right.
And the operating system is critical, I believe, and this is a wild ass guess because health is not my beat, but it's to both get the nanoparticles and other materials in you need to basically have you chip, but to basically interact with mind control. And the reality is, I want you to resonate with the machine instead of resonating with all life.
Yeah.
Because if you resonate with all life, I can't control you. You're
Yeah.
independently intelligent.
Yeah.
And unpredictable. And so I want you to resonate with life. And then the danger, of course, is if you look at all the systems they're putting into place, which are all systems for control, is that system just to end currencies, to re-engineer the financial system and control? Or are they planning on rolling out real pathogens that are going to do real damage? Not to say that, the CDC says 10,000 Americans have died from COVID-19 or hypoxia or whatever is happening, whatever the pathogens are. But so I'm not trying to negate the sort of whatever is going on.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
but
there's
I
some
think,
illness happening for sure.
yeah, the doctors, I have a couple doctors who are subscribers who've been describing all along what's going on, and they're seeing these very strange, um, and they call it hypoxia, but they're seeing very
Yeah.
strange patterns of hypoxia, and whether it's caused by 5G or chemical warfare, who knows? But my biggest concern watching the patterns in New York and the other places where you've seen some real thing happening, my concern is this is some pathogen that's in our bodies, whether it's from spraying or whatever the delivery mechanism, that they can turn on and off with EMF technology.
Right.
And they may, my concern is that they're putting in place the systems they need to do this on scale.
Yeah.
So I don't underestimate the possibility that Mr. Global is looking to significantly change the size of the population.
Right. So essentially, and it's maybe partly changing the size of the population, partly just sort of scaring the crap out of people so that they otherwise would question whether they want to accept these
Right.
chips
So
and
if
nanoparticles.
I'm a governor and you have the ability to turn on the EMF technology and kill 10,000 people, I can blackmail you into shutting down Main Street.
Yeah. Essentially,
So,
that's what's happened.
right. Well, it could be a control file. It could be, there's a whole, we have a series called Deep State Tactics, and all the tactics you use to get a governor, to act as ridiculous as some of these governors have. They have many ways of both incentivizing and blackmailing,
Yeah.
but they could also be blackmailing by threatening to kill people.
Yeah.
And what's scary is if you look at the invisible technologies that they've been using for quite some time, if you're a president or a governor, your general population can't fathom that a tsunami could be induced, or you can't fathom that EMF technology could turn deaths on and off. And so you're fighting with an enemy who's got invisible technologies, and your general population will never support you in fighting with them.
Yeah.
Because they just can't even fathom it exists.
Can't believe that you're right.
Right.
So do you see any prediction as far as the election that's coming up changing anything? Does that make any difference, or what's your take on that?
Well, it makes a difference if you look at the policies of the two sides, it will make differences. And if you look at what the two sides will do to fight back, when one of them doesn't win, that will make a difference. But the acceleration of re-engineering is going to happen one way or another.
Yeah.
Even if only as a financial matter, it has to. And so it has to, because you've basically taken all the assets that were going to support the boomers in their retirement, and you've shifted them out.
Yeah.
And in their place, you've left lots of treasury bills, and you're now tremendously debasing that currency. And you're in a process whereby the central bankers of the world are in the invention room prototyping and trying to come up with a new one. And in the meantime, you're trying to exercise complete control of the population in a variety of ways so that as this happens, you can maintain control.
So if I hear you correctly, what I'm hearing is the reason it has to happen is they have all these obligations, which they know that millions and millions of people would literally be pissed off if they don't meet them. And yet they have no way to meet them besides doing these extraordinary measures, which actually hide the fact that they don't have the ability to meet their obligations to the people.
Well, they have a way, but they'd rather not.
Yeah.
And they don't have to. In other words, if you look at how successful the mind control technology has been, they don't have to.
Yeah, because nobody catches on.
Not nobody, but
Not nobody.
There's 10% that catch on, but there's 80% who don't, or enough of them are willing to follow around the sort of the Judas goats who get paid to lead.
Yeah.
So I think one way or another it's coming to a head. Now, the biggest challenge we have to, whatever, the central banking warfare model has to be reinvented. It has to change. It has to evolve. So we do have to change how we do things. One, we can't, keep running around the world and killing everybody and stealing their stuff. That's part of the problem. But if we're going to become a multi-planetary civilization, we have to have a way, part of this is happening because there is a fundamental market demand for some kind of central banking function globally. And the challenge, we have many challenges of doing what the central bankers are trying to do is very, but how do you do that without bringing transparency to how the global governance system works?
Right. Yeah.
Right. Now, the other thing is, you can imagine why you're changing the fundamental technology of what transactions are done with, from currency to credit, or globalizing the central banking function. Because remember, what a lot of the wars for the last 10 years have been about are getting the countries that don't have privately owned central banks sort of in the privately owned central banking system.
Right.
So it's getting the central banks all uniform globally. One of the challenges of doing that is I described the transparency on the governance system, but you also have transparency, a problem about organized crime. If you're going to a system of total control, and yet the dollar has a $2 trillion float, a lot of that money being, used by organized crime, how do you convert to a total control system when you're highly dependent on organized crime and you're pretending it's happening because you can't control it?
Yeah.
So integration is a problem. And when you combine all those different things, which you opened up with, is enormous factionalism. So let me just propose to you, I think the number one most logical scenario we're facing is that the central bankers fail. In other words, the infighting and the factionalism is so great that their effort to bring in this total control system fails.
Oh, okay. Soon.
I don't know soon, because I think what they're up to will take minimum 2 to 3 years and could take 5 to 10 years, depending.
Yeah.
And I
Soon in
don't
the next 5 years, like.
Well, but I don't underestimate their ability to kill a lot of us. If you look at what they're talking, if you want to inject an operating system full of nanoparticles and heavy metals and fetal tissue into us, I'm assuming you can kill a lot of people.
Yeah, right.
Right. So, or you can sterilize a lot of people, maybe is what I should say. But I think what they're trying to do is so contradictory to life and natural law that it doesn't work, and you end up seeing the factions, blow up. And so the question for all of us is back to the red button problem. We refuse to push the red button. So now Mr. Global has pushed the red button. So, okay, how are we going to turn it green? Because if they fail, what's our plan?
Right. And so it sounds like the plan is decentralized local control and human to human, with systems in place to allow humans to be human with all their foibles and inconsistencies.
Right.
So that they can actually work it out in a combination of human and inspired sort of way.
Right. So if you can integrate technology allowing local autonomy bottom up, and build something where you're in alignment between money and life, both the environment, the animals, the plants, and humans too, which is very, it's more than possible, and scale up using, real free liquid transaction systems, you've got a chance. It's going to be very organic, very messy, but you're talking about a major step up in terms of bottom up responsibility.
Right.
Now, many cultures around the world have the culture to do that. The United States has been very you know, the culture of individual responsibility and maturity, you know, that has not been encouraged for the last 20, 30, 40 years.
Right.
So that's a big change.
Yeah. So if people out there are listening and they say, I get this, I want to work with this, where do they go? Who do they call? Where website? I mean, they go to solari.com, I think.
So if you go to solari.com, you can, there's a tremendous amount of information, but this is not a paint by numbers kit.
Yeah.
Okay. Because the first thing each one of us has to do, you know, there's what I can do underneath my, you know, within my own control. There's what I can do with my family. There's what I can do with the community. It scales out.
Yeah.
And each person's talents and situation and interests are different. But the first thing I would say is we have a piece called Coming Clean. It's public. Anybody can get it. The first thing you need to do is you need to clean out of your life anybody who's not faithful, ethical, competent, whether they're people or institutions. And then you need to take a good, serious look at your time and your money budgets and your assets.
Yeah.
And you need to say, how can I shift my time and my money, not only to build living or financial wealth, but to stop supporting all the things that are destroying my world.
Right. Got it.
I mean, if you're, you know, if I look at most people's portfolios, they're financing this.
Yes.
You know, why anybody has money in big pharma stocks. Now, I will tell you, when you look at your investments and your money, the first thing you need to ask yourself is, what are you doing to finance a clean, clear, coherent mind and a healthy body?
Yeah.
I was an investment advisor for 10 years, and it was very rarely I met a lot of people who were financing the national security state and not financing their own clear mind and healthy body. Right. Okay. So if you don't have a free mind and a healthy body, you're not even pulling up into the starting gate. And if you put money into financing the national security state and big pharma stocks, you're financing your own death.
Right.
You know,
you're susceptible to blackmail, because then if you don't do what they say, they're going to cut off your only income, and then you're
right. Right. Okay. So the first thing is you've got to get healthy, pull into the starting gate. That's number one. Number two, 20 years ago, it made sense to put your money in something that gave you a yield, and then take that yield and buy what you needed at the store. Now, whether it's risk issues or yield, since the yields are so low, it makes sense to be as resilient as possible and own what you do. I used to have a client who would constantly whine that her water bill was going up and the yield on her stocks were going down. I said, this is a no-brainer. She lived in a rural area. I said, sell your stocks and build a well.
Yeah. Right.
What? So we've been intermediated. Right. Take a look at your balance sheet and get the intermediaries out, pay off your debt, build your own well, whatever you can do. So you've got a group of people working together. Food, shelter, energy. What can you do for yourself or with other people around you? Now, I know you know this, but I'm just going to say this.
Essentially, you're saying invest in your life, your family's life, your community's life. The more you can control it, the more it's healthy, sound, safe way to live, like a well, instead of somebody putting fluoride in your water. That's how you build wealth and community.
Right. One of the best investment opportunities I've been able to find, I used to be able to find for some clients, were clients who had a community development loan fund or co-op that would take an investment to finance their operations. There's a lot of local opportunity. You just have to look and find it. Let me keep going though. The most important thing you need if you have an asset is you need an army to protect your asset. So if you come into Solari, we have something called the Take Action Crowd Fund. And it came from, it's happened about 6 months ago. A subscriber called me and she was selling a property and she wanted to know if she should buy more real estate or precious metals. And I said, you know something? if you look at where the leadership's going, they're going to take all of our assets. So I would say that you don't need more assets, you need an army.
Yeah.
So I encouraged her to finance a litigation effort that we're both familiar with. And then I said, we've got to do more of this. So we created something called the Take Action Crowd Fund. And you come into the Take Action Crowd Fund and we send you either to Children's Health Defense, the Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund, Stand Up Ohio. We're about to add Restore Freedom. But these are all litigators fighting for our freedom. Now, the most important army who's fighting for your freedom is your sheriff. Your sheriff is the constitutional determiner in your county.
Yeah.
In other words, the sheriff can literally tell the feds to leave. The sheriff has supreme constitutional authority within your county. You need to not worry about the presidential election and start worrying about who your sheriff is and making sure your sheriff will defend you and feels like he has the local support he needs to do that. Okay. Yeah. So in addition to food, shelter, energy, enforcement, who's your army? And that's a variety of things. Do you have a lawyer who's ready to back you up? I know you do, but so make sure you have your army. And then there's many other things beyond that you can find. There's just a ton of material at the Solari report.
Got it. That sounds like a good stopping point, Catherine. I can't tell you how grateful I am. And I think this will be invaluable for people to, there's a little bit of dark stuff, that's just life. But there's a lot of, here, we're not helpless here. We're not helpless.
So I'll tell you a little secret. Can I tell one more story?
One more story.
So when I was working in the 90s on the circulation of money locally, essentially the key to the economics at that time was taking the government money and turning it from a negative return on investment to a positive. Most of the federal money that comes into counties in America has a harmful impact because of the rules and regulate. It's used to control instead of to build wealth. Yeah. Anyway, so I had my smartest guy doing all the simulations of what could happen if we could just re-engineer everything, in the ways that we've been discussing. And he kept bringing back his results, and the increase in wealth was so fantastic, I thought he was making a mistake. And I kept saying, it has to be wrong. Go do it again. It can't possibly be right. And finally, he said to me, look, you have got to stop and take the weekend and go through all my numbers because it's not wrong.
Yeah.
And so I did. And what I discovered is the wealth potential is so enormous. If we could find a way to re-engineer the financial system in alignment with life, and let life be life and let life live, the wealth potential is fantastic. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable.
The wealth potential is just healthy people, healthy mind, healthy body,
right?
Healthy family, healthy environment, healthy school, healthy grocery store, healthy bank. Just go out and out and out, and then life is wonderful. Thanks for coming.
Right. Imagine if 325 million Americans were healthy.
Yeah, right.
Wow.
Yeah, there you go. All right, Catherine.
Thanks.
All right, talk again sometime soon.
Have a good one.
You too. Bye-bye.